This is the Mind Body Detox Podcast, where we discuss all things integrative health and wellness, interviewing folks from all over the world, sharing insights and wisdom on how to live a healthier life in mind, body, and spirit. Welcome back to the Mind Body Detox Podcast. I'm your host, integrative intuitive medium Kara Lovehart, and I'm very excited today to interview Midge Murphy. She is a practiced entertainment law professional for over a decade, and she has worked with the American broadcasting companies such as 20th Century Fox, Columbia Pictures, and Disney. And so what I find very interesting is after reaching her goal of becoming a respected entertainment attorney, she remembers sitting in her office in Century City, California, overlooking Beverly Hills, and hearing in her head Peggy Lee's song, "Is That All There Is?" In this episode, we're going to find out about how she got involved in energy healing, because obviously something called her more beyond the entertainment law. So the ethics involved in energy healing, we're going to talk about that, as well as the risks. And we're going to discuss the emerging field of energy medicine and speculate the milestones, including governed certification programs, legal licensing, and some other things that come along with new modalities as they go through the process of hitting mainstream. And we'll also talk to you out there if you are a client receiving energy healing modalities or care, what to be aware of and why it's important to work with an ethical and certified energy practitioner. So thank you so much for being on the show today, Midge Murphy. I would love to have a little bit of a background story for our listeners to tell us about how you got involved in energy healing and your background in entertainment law.
Well, thank you for having me. I think what happened was more of a spiritual awakening. I had become a very successful entertainment lawyer. That was my main goal going through law school and all of the process you do when you're starting out on a new career from college. And what I just realized there was something more. There was something this missing. And so I was given a gift of the book, The Autobiography of a Yogi, about Paramahansa Yogananda. And that was kind of an eye opener for me personally. And then I had the opportunity to have a new chapter. I left the entertainment industry and co-owned an adventure travel company for 20 years and had a chance to travel all over the world, mainly to high mountains. It was a trekking, adventure travel. And then I had the opportunity in the 1996, I think it was, I became a hospice volunteer. And I was given the opportunity to learn therapeutic touch, which came out of the nursing field as a hospice volunteer. And I had never had any exposure to any kind of energy work at all. And when I took the class, it was amazing. It was like intuitively, I just went, oh, I know how to do this. I can feel the energy. And so that kind of took me on a different path as well. And then I had the opportunity to meet Carolyn Mason, Norm Shealy, and then became interested in their PhD program in energy medicine. So I earned my PhD in 2000 has a PhD in energy medicine. And then I'm going, okay, now what am I going to do? Because it wasn't clear to me. I just was knowing that I needed to, from an intuitive level, high self, guide level, that this was something that was important that I needed to pay attention to. So it evolved into realizing that in the field of energy healing, there was no one addressing the ethical issues, the legal issues that are actually quite significant, and understanding the risk management and what kind of tools and strategies that you could implement to safeguard your practices as best as possible. And so I started working with both licensed and non-licensed practitioners, really helping them. And then I wrote my book, Practice Energy Healing and Integrity, The Joy of Offering Your Gifts Legally and Ethically. And that is really a great resource. It covers all of the major issues that any kind of energy healing practitioner would need to be aware of. And there's also an exam based on the book, and that's a professional credential. So if you take the exam, you earn a certificate of completion. And that's a professional credential that you can use to show how your level of integrity and level of professionalism in terms of how you want to operate and run your energy healing practice. I also work with quite a number of training organizations, and they are requiring their students going through a certification program or a training program to read the book and take the exam based on the book. That means that they've taken care of their ethics and legal training, which is essential. You do not have a qualified integrity professional certification training program unless that is part of your core curriculum. So I have those resources available. And the organization earns a commission on each exam a student purchases. So it's a win-win for the organization. They get their students properly trained because organizations can be held liable for the actions of the people they're training. And
Yes.
so it really behooves the training organization to make sure that they've trained their practitioners in ethics and legal issues. It reduces their potential legal liability, enhances the professionalism and the quality of the program, and it also is a revenue generating opportunity. So that was kind of my full circle into doing what I'm doing now. Yeah.
I want to just step back and rewind a bit to talk about briefly about Norm Shealy and Carolyn Miss, because they are two practitioners and professionals in this industry that I respect very greatly. And especially because Carolyn is so outright blunt about professionalism, ethics, integrity, and boundaries. And for those, I think, in the energy medicine profession, whether you're a client and you have received a session, a lot of times you are working with people who are healer type personalities. The psychology of that person, we're really giving, we're open, we're nurturing, we're kind, we're soft a lot of the time. And Carolyn is one of those people that sticks out in this profession because she is very boundaried. And I respect that so much about her because I have seen a lot of unintentional harm, just not the proper training in ethics and professionalism, but also just such good intention behind everything. But good intention, of course, doesn't protect you or the clients. So I know for me in my neck of the woods, that's been one of the things I've been so very passionate about in general. And I think that having the background working with them too is just like super exciting that you've worked with them, because I think that in order to move this profession into the mainstream, we need to have structure and boundaries and a space where it can be accepted in a way that this is what the standards of practice are. Because it's like the Wild West, and that I feel like is what happens with any new profession as it's making mainstream. I know that the chiropractic modality had gone through that, and early on there was even still this term kind of lingering around about chiropractors is that they're quacks. That term, and it's unfortunate that still lingers, but that was just because I think, again, early on there wasn't a set of standards or parameters of understanding a cohesiveness of how we operate, how they operate as a profession. And that's what's happened with the energy medicine modality as well. There's so many different types of modalities and not this cohesiveness that some people have experiences that puts a bad taste in their mouth. So I love that this is coming to the forefront so that we can bring this profession mainstream and forward. So in general, because energy healing and entertainment law are really not associated with each other, what were you noticing as you got into the energy medicine profession yourself? That what were you seeing in regards to ethics in like scope of practice, things that needed support that you were like, ooh, because I'm not a lawyer, but I know when I got involved, I'm a background in massage therapy. So we do have ethics professional with our licensure. And some people don't have a professional licensure as well as becoming trained or certified in energy healing. So I already saw things and I would go, ooh, I don't know if that's okay. And I'm not the ethics police. It's not my role here in the world. So tell us about what you were seeing and how you wanted to support that.
Well, I think I would just kind of mirror a lot of what you just said. And that is what I noticed is that people kind of wanted to get into this field. They maybe had a good experience and they carry what we call either the healer archetype or the rescuer archetype, which is based on Carolyn's book on sacred contracts. And I actually have a whole chapter in the book about that. Um, but I think what I noticed is that this lack of professionalism and what you mentioned, people came to this with good intentions. They soft hearts, they want to heal people, and they don't want to deal with the legal or regulatory issues. It's too scary. Um, and the fact is that it's fine. I honor the fact that you want to be in service to people and offer your services. However, there is so much more to the therapeutic relationship than just saying you want to help people. You have to understand when you're in, and that's what I go into in depth in the book, is when you're working with someone, especially with their energy system, you can do a lot of harm. And that's a huge myth out there that, oh, these are safe, they're non-invasive, no one ever gets hurt. And that is a complete and utter myth. The people have been very much damaged. And sometimes it's on purpose. Some people are driven by their egos and not even aware of it. A lot of times it's completely inadvertent because the person just doesn't know any better. So I just saw this huge void and realized that I could fill this void because I walk between these two worlds. And I think it might be helpful for the listeners to kind of get a sense of where does energy healing fit into the current legal and regulatory framework that governs healthcare professionals, because we are healthcare professionals. And I think it's
Yes.
important to understand that we are considered part of the field of complementary and alternative medicine. And they're using integrative medicine now too in some of the organizations, but I still like complementary and alternative medicine. And the definition I love is Michael Cohen wrote a book called Future Medicine. He's also an attorney and he's the leading academic in this field. And he said he considers complementary and alternative medicine, or CAM, to be a consensus term meaning anything outside of bio-Western medicine. So that's a huge group of modalities and different kinds of healing. I mean, all the indigenous work, nutrition, herbs, and so, and chiropractic as well, and acupuncture. I mean, the list goes on and on. So we're a subset within that broader umbrella of complementary and alternative medicine. So in that field, there are some professionals who are licensed in all 50 states, and that's the chiropractor. We mentioned chiropractors. And yes, they really had to fight for their turf and get set up, and now they're licensed in all 50 states and practice. There are some professionals who are licensed in some states and not in others, and that would be massage therapists,
Mhm.
naturopathic physicians, and also acupuncturists. It's interesting. I was just doing some research. There are only 3 states now that do not license acupuncture. So that has gained a lot of professional cred, I mean, in terms of its growth and acceptance into our healthcare system. And now there's only 3 states that don't license them. So then we have this a whole other thing called completely unregulated practices. And that's where the energy healing, energy medicine, biofield practices fall under this place of completely being unregulated. The only exception is that in some states, if you do any kind of hands on energy healing work, whether it's Reiki, healing touch, therapeutic touch, polarity therapy, there's a whole number of them, quantum touch, then you must be a licensed massage therapist in order to practice. And some states, Oregon's one of them, at least right now, in their Massage Practice Act, they exempt energy healing practitioners such as myself, who does hands on healing. I've been initiated as a Reiki master and I do therapeutic touch. I do not have to have a massage license in the state of Oregon because I'm exempt under the law. So I think it's important to kind of understand where we all kind of fit so you get a sense of, okay, that's the big picture. So in terms of Carolyn and Norm, I think with them, they came very early on in the late 90s when I first had the opportunity to meet them. And that's when they were still working and teaching together. And so I worked a lot with them when they were doing their intuition medicine series. And then this opportunity to join the PhD program came up, and I was really drawn to doing that. And Norm was the chair of my dissertation committee. And at that time, Carolyn was just writing her book, Sacred Contracts, and getting it ready to be published. So I love about the archetypes so they can really inform a therapeutic relationship. And I have a whole chapter on that with Carolyn's blessing about treating the therapeutic relationship between the energy healing practitioner and the client as a sacred contract. And what does that really mean?
I love that. Thank you so much for including that. Well, for our listeners who are not energy medicine practitioners, again, I think that a lot of them, and even energy medicine practitioners, are unaware of the legal scope of practice. So, what type of things can clients be aware of in regards to ethics and legalities for themselves when they're searching for a practitioner to work with, I'm
Yeah,
saying?
yeah. I love that question because I think it behooves the person who's interested in working with an energy healing practitioner to really do their due diligence. And one of the things you want to look at, first thing I would ask is, are you certified in the modality or modalities that you offer? To me, that's critical. But then you have to kind of even squeeze that down a little bit more, because there are certification programs that have some quality to them, and a lot of them are worthless. So if someone tells you they're certified, find out exactly what is the certification program they went through, and I would Google it and take a look
Yes.
at it and see what the level of professionalism is. Do they have to work with a certain number of practice clients? Do they have training in ethics and legal issues? Have they experienced the modality themselves? I think that's a really important question to ask as a potential client. So they know what it's like to be you in using that modality. And then what's the training? What's required to be trained? A weekend workshop doesn't cut it. It's
Yes.
completely
Yep.
unethical to say, okay, I'm a certified XYZ, and you just went to a weekend workshop or you read a manual over the internet. So it's the certification is the closest that we can get to some kind of level of showing that there's some level of competency and understanding in the modality that you want to offer. But again, I would really caution the listeners to make sure that they have researched that certification program, to
Yes.
make sure that it's legitimate, because there are a lot of them that
Yes.
are not. And so, I would ask about, can they need to have a client agreement for services. If you're not licensed, that's very important, so that you have a clear understanding what it is that they're offering and what disclosures are needing to be made, like you're not licensed, and that these modalities are not meant to replace, any kind of medical treatment or psychological uh, treatments, things like that, so that the client well knows that what you're offering is true and it's within the legally defined scope of practice of what the practitioner is wanting to offer. So what happens with unlicensed people, the biggest threat that they face is being charged with practicing medicine or psychotherapy without a license.
Yes.
That's the biggest threat that unlicensed practitioners, and it's a big one, because people on their websites have words like anxiety and depression and, "Oh, come to me and I'll cure your insomnia," and they're not licensed. Insomnia is a medical condition. If you have that word on your website, you put a red flag over your head, and any one of the 50 medical licensing boards could send you a cease and desist letter saying, "You are practicing medicine without a license. You are working with people with insomnia." That's a medical condition. So it's so important how you present yourself to the public, not only from the standpoint of the consumer, but also how you're looked and viewed at and perceived by the licensing boards and regulatory agencies. So if you're a potential client and you're wanting to work with someone, take a look at their website. Are they making sort of outlandish claims about what they can do? Are they misrepresenting, their credentials at all? I mean, it's really important to make sure that they're representing themselves in an authentic and real way. So some people say they're a doctor. Well, if you find out they have a PhD in chemistry.
Or a PhD in metaphysics.
Yeah, and so that's great. Then
Yeah.
you can say you
Yeah.
have that.
Yeah.
That's a credential. So yeah, but there's a lot of misrepresentation that goes on, and I think the consumer needs to be really mindful of that, um, and just make sure that they feel a rapport with that practitioner, and that they're professional. They have cancellation policies, and they're upfront with their fees and all that kind of stuff. And so I think those are some of the things that consumers need to look at if they want to hire, and work with, engage services of an energy healing practitioner that's not licensed in some other field.
When I started having clients come to me and share some of the experiences they had with other professionals, it was very disappointing. And some of them were really completely horrifying and challenging for me as a healer. And, it was for me a part of my healing journey to how do I learn to discern and to who to refer to, but also to have forgiveness, compassion for other healers and practitioners out there. Because, like you said, there are different places that people are coming from that their egos are really getting involved because there is, we talk about the spiritual egotism of really lacking a foundation in self confidence in just who you are as a person, not having a label of a special intuitive or healing powers or whatever that starts to cover up that insecurity. So we see that step forward sometimes, and then people just don't have good intentions involved versus people who do have those good intentions, like we talked about before, that just don't have the awareness in their own healing, that wounded healer coming from that archetype of I want to heal everyone else yet not myself. And so I really, really was a little bit concerned. And I found it more interesting when I had some people that share with me. I said, "Where did you learn your training for this or that?" "Oh, I watched a YouTube video." And, I thought, oh, wow. So it's one of those things where I didn't want to discourage anyone that would want to go into the healing profession, especially if they didn't have ears to hear or hearts to listen, that they're gaining self-confidence. They're gaining this sense of, I have something to give to the world that's really going to change it. And this passion and this drive and motivation behind it. It was really hard for me how do I use authentic voice to say to them, I'm concerned about, I want you to be successful, but I'm concerned about unintentional harm. Some people don't have the ears to hear it when they're in that really new space of excitement. So I really hope that, an easier way to sometimes disseminate that information is not directly, because sometimes they can't hear it directly because their egos will not hear you. But something like this podcast, I really hope if those of you out there know anyone who's an energy medicine practitioner or you are yourself, to hopefully you can hear this instead of someone directing it at you and say, hey, maybe take a look at this, because it does affect the good intentions that most of us have. This compassion, this love for wanting to heal the world that's behind all of this is, love really does include boundaries. It includes a safe container. And we may not always have that awareness yet along our journey, our development. But the more we move this into a safe container with these legalities and scope of practice, the more it can be spread to the world. So I'm curious then what your thoughts are about the next steps and the stages of the evolution of what could happen if we start creating more structure around energy medicine practices. What could happen as far as its evolution into the mainstream?
Well, I think it's already happening. I think what people need to be aware of is that a lot of states are moving towards licensing energy healing practitioners. So it's coming. Licensure is coming. And that
Whether we like it
will,
or not.
right, exactly. And so a lot of
Yeah.
people are against it, or some kind of registration. Vermont now has a registration program where you have to register if you're an unlicensed energy healing practitioner. Oregon was thinking about it. They haven't done anything about it, but there are several states that have legislation in committee that would license energy healing practitioners. So I think it is what's moving forward, because we have to remember we're in part of the healthcare system. And so, yes, people went to medical school because they wanted to be doctors, and they want, in their love and passion for doing healing work with patients, but they still had to be trained, right? And they had to take ethics, and they have to understand the legal issues, what it is they can and cannot do based on what the scope of practice is as defined by the laws and regulations that apply to their licensure. So that's all of there's physical therapists and all of the mental health care professionals, and, nurses, and, some, some states require nutritionists to be licensed. So I think what's happening, what people need to be aware of, is we are moving forward to bringing this more into a place of more regulation. And it's based on the 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution, in that states have the right to pass laws and regulations to protect the safety and welfare of its citizens. And so they're really looking and saying, look, there are a lot of people out there practicing. People are suffering. With good intentions or whatnot, people are being harmed, and you're offering a professional service. So for me, it's like you got to put your big girl panties on. It's like, this is a
Yeah.
business, this is a service. You need to be properly trained, and this is what you need to do. And so that includes, going through a really quality training program and getting certified, and making sure you have your ethics and legal training, actually knowing what it is that you can do and not do, because ultimately your legally defined scope of practice is defined by law.
Yeah.
So you can't, there's just so much going on right now with that. So I think that's why the book is, I think, a great resource, in that it provides a lot of just really core fundamental information for practitioners and training organizations to be aware of, including really, how do you assess whether or not a client is appropriate for what you do? Not
Yeah.
everybody who walks through your door is going to be an appropriate client. And you have to
Yes.
learn judgment and discernment as to who's appropriate for you. Who do you think you can really help? Someone comes into me, I'm not a licensed psychotherapist, and I maybe do some energy healing work with them. But if they have a major psychological issue, I refer them to a licensed psychologist or other mental health care professional. That's the ethical thing to do. As soon as you take that on and say, well, I can help this person, maybe they're bipolar. Maybe it turns out they have multiple personality disorders or something else, or some deep, deep trauma. I'm not qualified, and legally I cannot offer my services to that person. And it's about saying, well, I want to do this and this and this. It's like, how do I stay in integrity and be with that person and offer the highest quality of ethical professionalism that I can? And that means I refer them to someone who's more appropriate for what they need. So I think there's just a lot of nuances of if of, yes, I want to help people, but within the right confines with the right boundaries, understanding the power differential, what happens when people go into slightly altered state of consciousness when they're doing energy healing work. They're so much more susceptible to words and suggestions. You have to be extremely careful. You're just a witness. They
Yeah.
are the healers. Here's another thing. Don't ever use the title of healer for two reasons. One is it's unethical. You are not the healer. The only true healer in the room is your client. And
Yes.
second, if you call yourself a healer, you are practicing medicine without a license. And there are case laws, there's laws on the books that people have been prosecuted. It's a crime to practice medicine without a license. And so people have been prosecuted for calling themselves healers that are just doing
Wow.
hands-on healing work. And this was, I think, out of New York in the 1930s or something. But this
Wow.
law is still on the books. So use of title is really important, and how you go about that. So there's a lot to consider, and I think it's just important if you do have a passion for this work, then you need to make sure that you have the level of professionalism that is required to offer your services to the public. And it's more than just having a good intention. It's being properly trained and having a business structure and understanding what it is you can and cannot do based on the laws and regulations that apply to you. And I think for us as energy healing practitioners, it's not only the states in which you actually have your practice, but you work across state lines, right?
Mhm.
We can do distance work with people. And so you're subject to the laws and regulations of the state in which your client resides as well.
That's a
So
very important information to share. Not a lot of people think about that. I'm
yeah,
sure.
and there are some states that have safe harbor laws, and those are states which have said, "Hey, we realize that we have these alternative healing arts practitioners in our state, and our citizens would like to access them, but there's such a dark cloud of them being charged with practicing medicine without a license that it's really not allowing our citizens to access their services because there's too much fear around it." And
Yeah.
that's the ethical principle of autonomy, which is still highly regarded in our system. And that means the client's right to choose. So some states, there's only a handful, but they say, okay, if you are a healing arts practitioner and you want to offer your services to the public and not be under the threat of being charged with practicing medicine without a license, we passed a law that says, okay, you can offer your services. There are certain things you cannot do, which obviously you're not going to do surgery. You're not going to tell someone to stop taking their medications. You're not going to set bones. You're not going to order x-rays. I mean, all the kind of stuff. You're not going to diagnose or specifically treat any medical condition. But as long as you have a client agreement and disclosure statement that has these certain elements, your background and training, your qualifications, the theoretical basis of the methods that you offer, the fact that you're not licensed, you must disclose that, and that your
Mhm.
services are not licensed by the state. Let's say California, for example, has this. As long as you're in compliance with this law, then you can offer your services without the threat of being charged with practicing medicine without a license. So there's about 9 states that have these kinds of laws. And so if you're in that state, that's a real boost for you.
Yeah.
And so you want to check that out. But it doesn't protect you from being charged with practicing psychotherapy without a license. So you have to be really cautious about dealing with people's emotional issues and things like that. So it's a slippery slope. It can be
Mhm.
done. I'm all about empowering. If anyone,
Yeah.
all of my clients have been doing this for almost 20 years. It's like, okay, I want to empower you so that you feel comfortable as much as possible. Let's let's tamp down as much risk as we can so that you feel comfortable and empowered offering your services to the public.
Yeah.
And that's been my mission. But what's so funny is I have to say, I work with people all over the country. And let's say in California, I have a client, I'm going to help them with their practice, set up their, do an audit of their website and write their client agreement and things like that. They're not even aware that they have a healthcare freedom law that can protect them, number one. And if they are aware of it, they're not in compliance. And so they're not protected. So there's just so much education that still needs to be done So that's why I'm here, and I wanted to share this information with you, and I'm really appreciative of this time. That my book is a great resource, and it's really important for us as energy healing practitioners to really to move forward and to be able to offer our services to more people, to really
Yes.
step up and become more professional.
So you're who I've been looking for years. The resources that I had for offering our students through our energy healing program, that was really challenging for us. But luckily, we were so fortunate. We have an energy medicine practitioner. Her name is Candy, that's been doing psychotherapy for 40 years. And she was one of the first people to integrate that energy medicine into a state hospital, but for the practitioners that worked there, for their own burnout and things like that. So her background and experience, and also having her as a resource to help these students understand that very fine line when someone comes in and starts to talk about their emotional state, and that psychotherapy counseling dynamic starts to form. How do we cut that off? How do we know? How do we set that boundary up front so that the client's very clear? And I was so grateful for that, because she is a resource that I'm not a psychotherapist, so having her, and also we work with her as well, so she does couple her energy medicine practices with her psychotherapy and counseling. So if someone is not a right fit for us, we can refer them to her. And so I love that, and I think that networking as a energy medicine practitioner to find these other practitioners that you can refer to are really important. And I find that, again, the one of the reasons for the listeners who are not energy medicine practitioners and you're a client, that why this kind of space is also booming is because it does help. There is so much power to energy medicine practices, and because someone can go online on YouTube and quote unquote become certified and get a certificate, that is really also being driven by the financial income possibilities for that person as well. People are seeing, I don't have to go spend this much money to go become a licensed massage therapist to charge 75 to 100, 120, whatever they charge in their state or location to have a client for an hour to make a living. I can charge around that amount or a little less just getting a certificate on YouTube or whatever. So just so the clients are aware, this is why it's happening so quickly. And anyone just can go. I always hear Carolyn Misses in my mind saying over again, you can't just take an energy medicine course. You can't just take a medical intuition course or learn or watch an audio program and say and put out your shingle. She always said about putting out your shingle. You can't do that. So she's been so paramount in just echoing this out to the community that I feel like her voice is still there, but more people just haven't been able to hear it or had the access to it. So I'm so happy that you're here and you exist, because we're absolutely going to start incorporating your book and your information, your certification program into our training, because it's so important for me. I find it part of my journey is to bridge the gap between East and West, and between grounded practices, business practices, and the way out there woo woo, because I'm a medium myself. So I do some of this work and it's really powerful. But there's also a line of where does my scope begin and end? And if I can place my mark on the world, is to have the luckily to have the clinic and have the space and have the authority to say, this is what we're doing in our program, this is what we're not. And so thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Because I've been looking for you and I'm looking for this resource, again, always trying to improve it. But the other thing I wanted to just ask for the clients who maybe are listening, who have had energy medicine or whatever, they might be thinking, if they're not trained or have any more awareness about energy medicine practices, I feel like one of their thoughts might be, how can it harm me? Like someone's just, doing energy, wafting their hands above my body, or they've been putting their hands on me at certain places. How on earth can that hurt me? So I'd love to just share some examples, if possible, of things you've seen and things that are common, even with power differentials, that could give them an example of things that may have happened or they want to watch out for, that could in fact be possible doing harm, even if unintentionally.
Yeah, and I think you could probably have some examples as well in your practice and your experience. I think some of the things that can happen is we know with energy medicine that there can be huge shifts very quickly. And so I've seen where people have almost had like a unity consciousness experience, which shifts their worldview. And can be very alarming. So it's really about taking care of that client to make sure that they're grounded again, they're able to function. but it can change their whole worldview, which means that their family members, their extended family, or even their social circle can all of a sudden there's just it can be very jarring, where they don't long no longer fit, and it can cause a lot of distress, and it can end marriages sometimes. And people decide they don't want to belong to that particular church anymore because they had a completely different experience of unity consciousness or great spirit or whatever you want to call that shifted everything for them. So that's one of the things that you need to be aware of. And I think another one is that because people are generally tend to be a little bit in an altered state when you're doing energy work with them, is that, again, a word or phrase that can make us, you're thinking you're giving a suggestion, but to them it's a directive. And that becomes like a directive, like to leave their job, or you need to move somewhere else, or there's so many different things that can happen where it's then they get upset if it doesn't work out properly. I think another issue happens a lot, and this is it's called the Dartman triangle, but it's an archetypal sort of look at what happens when you're in an energy healing practitioner and someone has a really fabulous experience, and they come out of the session or they have a series of sessions and they are like, oh my god, that was so awesome. It's like, you healed me, and oh, this is amazing. And as soon as you take that projection, you are really on a pedestal, and it is going to crumble,
Yes.
because as soon as you take that projection, you have to give it back. You have to say, oh no, it was such an honor. You're the one that did this work. I'm honored that I could be a witness, that I could create a container to help you do this. But this is the work that you did, your higher self, your guides, however you view all of that aspect of your soul, and your higher powers, and whatever else you believe in. It's this is you did it, I didn't do it.
Yes.
Because as soon as you disempower them, then the next time it doesn't work out so good, they don't have the same positive experience, and they think, well, what did you do to me? And then you have lawsuits happening. People get really upset.
Yeah.
um, and so that's a couple of things I think to be aware of, and how people can be harmed. And you just may not feel very well afterwards. So that's you have to have risks and benefits in your client agreement and disclosure statement. When you work some people's energy, sometimes people get nauseous.
Yeah.
Sometimes people detox something,
Yes.
and you have to be, depending on the modality, some of them are much more like that. um, like biofield tuning, those tuning forks can be very powerful, but you can have a contraindication, and some things can happen that are not so pleasant. So you have to disclose that so the client understands, so this is just part of the process. And so, but if they go home and they're nauseous and they're feeling weirdly strange and they're just kind of freaking out, then they go do something dumb and they hurt themselves. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
lawsuit waiting to happen. So there's
Yes.
just a lot of nuances around making sure your client, keeping that container safe. And so when they're done with the session, to make sure that you've brought them back so they're in normal consciousness, they're solid, they can take care of themselves, they can get down the stairs without
Yep.
falling, they can drive home.
Yes.
All of that is important. I talk about that in the book as well. That's an
Yeah.
important concept as well, to make sure that they're safe.
So, folks out there, if you're a client or you're an energy medicine practitioner, I believe we really need to get this right. And I believe it's going to lay the foundation for a lot more things to come. I mean, I'm not sure, Midge, how much your finger is on the pulse of the up and coming, especially living in Oregon, the up and coming, mainstreaming of psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, and that another space where there is a lot of unlicensed practitioners helping and integration and helping sit for people who are going through psychedelic experiences, again, in a much more deeply altered state. And so the ethics and professionalism around that is something that I'm watching, because I know that's already a can of worms to open up, but it's so powerful, and the research and things that are coming for that. But in general, if we can't get that right or work with this as a community of energy healers to really make a commitment to learning more and educating ourselves, empowering ourselves and our clients, versus creating a power dynamic or power differential between the client needing to follow you and give away their power to you as the healer or you as the guru. This is how cults are formed. This is how things like this, that in this day and age, we as a community and a society are becoming so much more aware of, and of course, triggered by misuses of power in leadership and organizations for reason. And this is how we can cut that off is by bringing awareness to how we're practicing, empowering our clients, and continuing to lay this framework, because psychedelic medicine and assisted psychotherapy and other things, that's coming. And again, it's just another way that, indigenous cultures used plant medicine for years in that capacity. And that's still coming to, it's a completely different topic, but both of these still altered states of consciousness in a profound way. And I love that you mentioned that it can break up marriages and shift people in a huge way, because people do have an awareness of an identity shift. Like, wait a minute, all these things that I thought mattered to me or who I've been expressing myself to be, this job that I've decided I wanted to do, this is not what I really want to do. And when people will do a whole complete 180, and that can scare their family, it can bring up, also from the practitioner's perspective, I've seen people who are coming from maybe more religious or specific philosophies can sometimes villainize energy medicine practitioners and think they're doing some sort of magic voodoo and making their loved ones decide they want to get divorced or they want to go down the spiritual path. And then we get projected upon as the devil or some sort of weird occult practices, when that's not the case either. So there are so many things that we could talk, and that's scary, being an energy medicine practitioner, when all we want to do is be there to help, to facilitate, and to guide. And I've had that watched that happen, and it's been hard, because that's when, even if someone comes in and they are completely psychologically sound, you know what I mean? There's nothing that's bringing up a threat to potentially don't work with this client. Those things can happen. And like I've seen marriages end, and this is from the choice of the client, them working with counselors, with coaches, with nutritionists, changing their life completely, and me just being an energy medicine facilitator to help get them balanced along that journey. And because what I did was the most strange of them all, I was projected on by the wife, the ex, that why is this person leaving me? And it's really, it's taken a lot of courage and compassion for me to know that what I'm doing isn't wrong, but that still does happen. And so I'm really glad you talked about that.
And I think with the plant medicine, it's interesting what's happening in Oregon, because we passed a law allowing this service to be given to the public, but everyone's going through extensive training. You have to be licensed to offer it
Yes.
here in Oregon. And
Yes.
there's centers now that have been opened up.
Yep.
The training is very extensive.
Yep.
I've watched it. It's being done very, very well.
Agreed.
So yeah, so I think, I don't know what's happening in other states, but here it's legalized, but it's being regulated, and anyone who's involved has to be licensed. And it's a special program. It's not like you can't be a psychologist and say, okay, I want to work with people doing psychedelic medicine and doing a journey with some mushrooms. They're specifically trained for this type of work.
Yes.
So I'm really pleased about what Oregon's doing in that regard.
Yeah, me too, because I feel like it has a really big shift for our consciousness that's needed. Just like Reiki and energy medicine practitioners can create that huge shift for people and help them awaken more to a love consciousness. It's the same thing. I mean, I have a perspective of, how does it shift the consciousness? Well, if you can get us out of beta brainwaves and get us more into a higher functioning, even how the brain operates, we can now operate from a higher state of problem solving and thinking, instead of from base survival instincts, which is war consciousness. And when we shift that, there is a lack of polarization viewpoints, not a us versus them, better versus worse. It changes so much. And when most of the paradigm of our society is still operating from that polarization viewpoint, they can't even see or comprehend that level of awareness until they shut down that part of the brain that's operating. It's not even a matter of intelligence, of, oh, you're more trained, you're more intelligent. Even energy medicine practitioners, we can still be in that. If we're coming from a place of lack, Maslow's hierarchy needs are not met, we can be in a state of survival and still operate from that consciousness, even if our intention is good. So
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's that concept of duality.
yeah.
And I think, energy medicine, energy healing practices, biofield practices are based on quantum physics. And so what we know is that when you distill everything down, everything is just energy, and everything is connected. The biofield, we are all one. And that goes back to the indigenous cultures. I studied with a Lakota medicine man for several years. And, that's, we are all one is what we would say at the fire. So I
Yeah.
think that's where our society is still this, as you say, duality. It's like us versus them. And we're moving out of that more to an integrative approach to healthcare. So it's not just the body. It's because Western medicine is based on Newtonian physics, which is
Yes.
okay. I love, if I break my arm, I certainly want to get it fixed, right? But there's so much more to the healing process. And now we're starting to awaken to that, a more holistic approach. I may break my arm and the doc says, okay, it's going to take you 10 weeks to heal yourself and be ready to use that arm. And I'm going, I don't think so. And I can use energy medicine as part of my protocol, and I'm ready to go in 4 weeks.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that approach is really the mindset and the paradigm that I'm so grateful and honored to have guests like you and every day the guests that come on the show. It's part of our mission, it feels like, this calling. I attract those people. Like, we're the bridges. Like, how do we continue to do this? And so thank you again, fellow soul, doing this work, because it takes all of us. And I really just get super jazzed up about it, continuing to meet people that are in that same space. It feels we're not doing it alone. And I think those out there who are listening too, you're excited about this. That's why you're obviously you're still listening to the episode now, if you've gotten this far. So yeah, I appreciate it so much, Midge.
Oh, you're so welcome.
The final questions I have here are: what are your hopes for the energy medicine industry?
Well, I think it's always about how can we best be in service to our communities. That's really the bottom line. And so in our culture and our society and the way our healthcare system is currently framed, that means we continue to move forward so that we can integrate into the healthcare system. So that may mean some kind of regulation. And I'm not against regulation because I'm going to go back to what you said at the very beginning. And it's even in my book, it's the wild, wild west. Anybody can hang up a shingle. And how does that really be in service to our communities with that kind of practitioner? So to me, it's about being in service, moving it forward so that we can help more people
Yeah.
because energy medicine really works and
Yes.
it can really help people tremendously on multiple levels of awareness and
Yes.
on health and well-being. So
Absolutely. And I encourage you, listeners, to, if you have not listened to some of the energy medicine modalities that we've talked about color puncture, we've had a Reiki training, or I'm sorry, a Reiki podcast. And we've also talked about the different archetypes of healers. What archetype of healer are you? Where do you fall? And what are you as far as your progression? So I encourage you to listen to those. I'll pop them in the show notes, as well as we're going to share information in the show notes about Midge and her book. But I want to ask you, what else would you like us to know? And how can we learn more about your work and your book?
well, thank you for that. Yes, the book is available on Amazon. It's a print book. And so you can purchase it on Amazon. Also, the Kindle version of the book is available on Amazon. On my website, which is very simple, it's just midgemurphy.com. You'll find the PDF version of the book is also available. And also on my website is where the exam based on the book is available. It's only $150 for the exam. Again, you earn a certificate of completion and 6 continuing education hours. Again, it's a professional credential that you can use to make yourself more enhanced as a professional. And then I have lots of blog articles that are free that are on my website, and there's some other areas that people may be interested in. So yeah, if they can go to my website and they can learn more about the book. I also have an EFT tapping ethics legal online course specifically for tapping practitioners. And so that's an online course that people can take and earn a certificate of completion similar to the book and exam. But I wrote that because I work so much within the field of the tapping, energy psychology and EFT, emotional freedom techniques, and tapping, meridian tapping. So I created a specialized course just for those types of practitioners.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We're really grateful to have you on the show. It's just so much information that we really needed to hear, and I'm hoping that you guys share this episode with others. But as always, we have our two final questions for our guests when we have them on for the first time. So our last two questions, Miss Midge, are: what is your favorite product, wellness topic, or self-care indulgence at this time?
Well, it is forest bathing. Have you heard of forest bathing?
I have, and I thought so because of the trekking business and the adventure trekking that you would be saying something like that.
Yeah, actually, I'm a certified forest therapy guide. I take people on guided forest immersion walks on my property. I actually live on 50 acres outside of Eugene, Oregon, and the land has been calling me for 15 years to do healing work on the land. And I was trying to figure that out. And finally, I realized it's forest bathing. It's a wonderful wellness tool. It's about slowing down, connecting through your senses to the natural world, and having the ability to connect with what we call the more than human world. for your health and well-being. We are nature, and we forget that. And so it's a chance to just improve your health and well-being. It lowers blood pressure, all the stress hormones, boosts your immune system, lifts depression. It's a wonderful experience. And so now I'm a certified forest therapy guide. I actually take people on guided forest immersion walks on my property for their overall health and well-being. And my partner is the forest, and that makes me really happy.
I love that. I love it so much, and especially who would not want to do this in Oregon? Oregon is gorgeous and beautiful, and the energy is pristine in as far as when I had visited there. So awesome. So the last question is,
Okay.
if you could detox one thing in your life or the world right now, what would it be?
Oh, that's a good question. Let's see. I think detox would for the divisiveness in our society right now, our culture. So distressing what we see on the political scene, what's happening with the LGBTQ community, all of that, and the lack of acceptance. So I would love to have everyone come together and realize we are all one and not have all of this rhetoric and the lies and the misinformation that's out there so that, we can have a society that accepts all of our community members and doesn't want to ostracize or harm those that don't fit what they think is a correct way to be in the world. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Thank you so much. I completely agree. But not if we can get away from the polarization, I think that would be very helpful for all of us.
yeah,
So thank you everyone again for listening. Thank you so much, Midge Murphy, for coming on. We encourage you to go visit her information and keep an eye out if you are a part of our online or in person, any sort of training program for professionalism as an energy medicine practitioner. We will absolutely have some resources and certification through Midge because we're absolutely, if you haven't heard, I'm excited to this feeling beyond for everything here. So thank you again for coming and listening, everyone, and be well until next time, my friends. Thank you for listening to the Mind Body Detox podcast. We wish you wellness and health in your mind, body, and spirit. And be well until next time, my friends.